Well, good Friday morning, friends. Mark Holmes here, of course, with my buddy Cowboy Joe Boo, as well as Joe Bear in the house. And as always, I want to thank you all for watching, commenting, subscribing, and being part of the Joe Boo Sports Report. Without you guys, as well as you ladies, you know that this literally does not work. So let's get open for business here, and let's wake up the football gods. Man, it is almost the weekend, and guys, ladies, friends, enemies, whether you love me or hate me, you're going to love that. Take a look down there, guys. 55 days, 10 hours, 36 minutes, and 5 seconds away from kickoff of the 2022 season. I don't know about you, but I'm happy. The fact that we are only a week and a half away from training camp opening up for the Dallas Cowboys. In fact, we're only 6 days away from some training camps actually opening. In 6 days, we will be able to actually talk about players on the field instead of all this bullshit nonsense that we've been getting, which is, conjecture. Who's going to be this? Who should be benched? Who should be started? Who should be traded for? Who's the top 10? Who's the best? Who fell back down? Who's going to be up-and-comers? Actually, you don't actually hear about them actually predicting teams that are going to go from worst to first. The Cincinnati Bengals, the teams that they look and say, yeah, they were ass last year, but they're going to be in the Super Bowl this year. It seems like they usually, unless they're the Cowboys, take the playoff teams from last year and say they're going to be great this year, knowing that half of them won't make the playoffs next year. We'll have to wait and see. Now, the thing we do know is in the NFC East, the NFC least, as some people like to call it, but I don't quite agree with that. I think there were some ass divisions out there. I could say NFC North with the Vikings and the Bears and, of course, the Lions. Not exactly the cream of the crop of the NFL that Aaron Rodgers faced, but be that as it may. The NFC East has not had a repeat champion, since the 2003-2004 season. And I've been saying that for about 10 years now. And it seems like it just keeps getting crazier and crazier. And it doesn't seem to matter how good the team was before. Can the Dallas Cowboys break that curse? Now, what we've heard the first half of the offseason was the Dallas Cowboys are terrible. It's hard to believe that they won 12-5 games, 12-5. The way they trashed them and how bad they were. Zeke Elliott is done, but somehow he's in the list of top 10 running backs. In fact, Zeke Elliott, you can say longevity-wise, has been pretty good. Since 2016, Zeke Elliott has more rushing yards than anybody else, 7,386. Does that mean he's washed up? I don't think that he is. I'm not going to say he's the same guy he was in 2016, but the first half of the season, he was on pace for like 1,400 yards. Before the PCL injury and before we started having problems on the offensive line. And keep in mind, the second half of the season, it wasn't like Tony Pollard was exactly feasting and blowing things up. If the offensive line gets back in shape, as Tony Romo was talking about yesterday, I shared it last night on my fireside chat, he looked to see the offense more like the 2014-2016 offense, which was more balanced. DeMarco Murray, 1,800 yards. Tony Romo, lighting up the scoreboard, but not having to throw for, 300 yards a game. In fact, I think in that season, Tony Romo only had 2 games where he had to throw for 300 yards. That truly was balance. Throwing 400 yards a game to have to win games, you're not going to win the Super Bowl that way. You must be able to run the football, and that's going to be key. The question will be will the Cowboys be able to run the football? And will the loss of Amari Cooper be the downfall for the Cowboys? I have some personal thoughts that kind of hit me today about that situation. I'll deal with that later. But right now, we want to go to Jane Slater because, Jane Slater, she'll be covering training camp. She'll be there at practice. We talking about practice. Not a game. Not a game. We talking about practice. But we'll be happy to talk about practice. Let's go to the Rich Eisen Show, where Rich is on vacation, and listen to the lovely and talented Jane Slater.
Yeah, just getting ready for camp. I love hearing TJ. It's like the collective voice of the Cowboys. Everybody gets excited. There's new hope because even though they went in that 12-5 run last year, it just felt like that playoff game against the 49ers,
Sucked
where
the
they were in
life
the
out of us.
quarterback draw with, 13 seconds to go. They don't hand the ball to the ref. There were just so many questions about this team and how, once again, it just felt like the wheels came off the bus. So I know there's a huge fan base of fans just like you, TJ, just very excited for camp and any Cowboys news that comes out.
Of course.
NFL Network reporter and friend of the show, Jane Slater, checking in. And later on in the show today, Jane, we're going to have our list of top 10 wide receivers in the NFL. We've got 3 lists, one from me, one from TJ, one from Brockman. How many of those lists do you think are going to feature CeeDee Lamb?
It's hard. I don't know what to make of CeeDee Lamb, because was CeeDee Lamb effective because of Amari Cooper, and then we had some of the drops last year, or is he going to step up and really embrace that role? I think the biggest push that I kept hearing, whispers around the building, was the frustration that they wouldn't get the ball to the playmaker. In other words, who is your playmaker? And it was Amari Cooper. If you'll remember when Cooper Rush was the starting quarterback in Minnesota, he was the playmaker. You put the ball in Amari's hands and you win the game, a game that they weren't expected to necessarily win on the road. And so I think that's going to honestly be the biggest question mark heading into training camp, besides who's going to be the kicker, is can CeeDee Lamb really step into that role? And by the way, they've got Jalen Tolbert, James Washington, and you're not going to have Michael Gallup the first couple of weeks. And then Noah Brown is always a really strong candidate that really steps out in camp, and then you see sort of flash them during the season. So maybe we see an increased role for him. But I have a hard time answering your question there, Ben, because I don't quite know what to expect from CeeDee as he steps into that role. I know that he does all the things the right way. He's been getting in a lot of reps. I have a ton of respect for him just as a person and as a human. But in terms of, is he going to emerge as that guy in Dallas? There's a lot of pressure when you wear the 88. We'll see. I think there's a lot of question marks on this team, specifically offensively.
He's definitely one of my favorite young players in the league, so I'm keeping my eyes on CeeDee Lamb this year. And another question mark in Dallas is around Ezekiel Elliott. TJ, of course, had him on his top 10 running backs list yesterday. Whether it's health concerns, off the field stuff, whatever it is, there's always question marks around Zeke. What are you expecting from him this season? And talk to me about the state of Ezekiel Elliott.
Well, I saw him, it was OTAs or minicamp, it was OTAs, and I pulled him off the side as he was walking out of the locker room, and I asked him, I said, how hurt were you last year? And he told me he had a PCL on his right side, and it happened after Carolina. I said, how did it affect your game? And he said it really impacted his ability to separate, in other words, to really sort of get the ground and the burst that he needed. And so I get the sense that he's healthy. These off-the-field issues haven't been a problem in Dallas really in the last 3 years. And it was Dak who even said, and of course they're best friends, so you expect this, but he said when healthy, he thinks Zeke is the best running back in the league. It's just hard when you've got guys like Dalvin Cook and whatnot, who in the last couple of years have really emerged as strong running backs, what to expect from Zeke. I think sometimes, too, when you get the contract with the extra zeros and you saw him do the holdout and, shout out to his agent, Rocky Arsenault, that may be the biggest running back contract we ever see again, just because we've seen how it's played out with some of these guys. But I think because of that contract, there's been just increased scrutiny on him. And it doesn't help that you have a younger guy like Tony Pollard, who a lot of people think should be getting more reps. And I would also submit that with that offensive line, Zeke's first couple of years, when you had Travis Frederick at center and you had a healthy Tyron Smith and Zach Martin, all those guys, that's why Zeke was able to be as successful as he was. And you've really seen a deterioration of that offensive line. And by the way, you're going to have a rookie on that line this year. Tyron Smith, you hope that he stays healthy. We've definitely seen, some of the injuries pop up in recent years. And so, it's not just one thing, right? And so I think there's a couple of things that are going to play in here, but, I've seen him doing more working out in the last 2 off seasons than we've seen him do before. But I think he's better when Dak's healthier, and he's better when you've got a strong offensive line. I think that really does apply to any running back. That's the key. Though.
That is the key, is going to be the offensive line. Let's be clear here. They say PCL. I don't know if people understand PCL, okay? PCL sounds different than when you talk about posterior ligament. You know, ACL is your anterior cruciate ligament, okay? The anterior cruciate, which is the one that everybody tears, which is smaller than the posterior. But the thing is, you know, if you imagine the tear in there, this basically takes the thigh bone and connects it to the two of them. It crisscrosses with the ACL in the knee. And when you tear this or you sprain this or you hurt this, you're going to have instability in the knee. You're going to have pain in the knee. It is going to be harder to push off with the knee. If you don't think that that PCL injury affected Zeke Elliott, then you've never had a knee injury, or you've never had a calf injury, or you've never had an ankle injury. You've got to understand, with a running back, you must be able to plant and push. You must be able to cut. And when you have a knee that's unstable and it's moving around and it's painful, that means you're taking anti-inflammatories, you're taking shots for the pains and all kinds of pains and everything, medication. You are not as effective. Now, this is different than you look at and say arthritis in the knee. Todd Gurley's problem was Todd Gurley had knee surgeries and things and multiple injuries in his knee, and he ended up getting arthritis in it. And arthritis basically is kind of like a plaque that gets on the joints. It gets in between. I have arthritis in the knees. And when you get that, it makes it tougher to bend. It makes it more painful. You aren't as strong. You aren't as quick. Zeke Elliott, this is really the first knee injury that he's had. He hasn't had to have surgery on his knees. His knees, for the most part, are pretty clear. It's just that you had that partial tear that they didn't have to have surgery on it. It heals and has healed. And when you look at the numbers from last season, even with 4 games of him having the PCL tear, the first half of the season before the offensive line ended up changing around. And, you know, I'm going to have I'm going to fight the revisionist history where everybody talks about how much losing La'el Collins hurt. But I'm going to be the one to say that La'el Collins coming back, that the offensive line was worse. Those first 8 games without La'el Collins were the best 8 games of the offensive line. Once La'el Collins came over, Terrence Steele went on the other side, the offensive line was terrible. It was terrible. And even with a good PCL, I can guarantee you that Zeke Elliott wouldn't have had the same numbers the second half of the season that he had in the first, because the holes were not there. We did so many things on the offensive line. Connor Williams, the penalty magnet that he was, they benched him for Connor McGovern. Connor McGovern could not get to the second level. And if you don't understand that, that means as a guard, which means you usually are uncovered, your job is to be able to block the linebackers. That's getting to the second level. Connor McGovern, they realize, can't get to the second level, which means the linebackers are free to scrape and fill the holes and get your running backs. And the thing about football that is so ridiculous to me is everybody will point the fingers at just one person without looking at all of the circumstances that have to go together. You know, in Boy Scouts, we learned something. In order to have a fire, you have to have 3 things. You have to have fuel, something to burn. You have to have oxygen, because the air it feeds the fire. And you must have heat. If you take away any of those 3 things, any one of them, you cannot have a fire. You can't have a fire if there's not oxygen. You cannot have a fire if there's not heat. You cannot have a fire if there's not fuel to burn. It just doesn't happen. And that's the same thing with football. If you have a guy who has a penalty, you can't have a play. If you have a guy who can't block and doesn't get his guy, you're not going to have a play. If you have a guy who can't hold on to the football, you're not going to have a play. All of the things have to work in concert in the same way to have a fire, that you have to have oxygen, fuel, and heat. You have to have all of these things together collectively to be making plays. And for Zeke to be injured, for the offensive line to keep shuffling, these are all things that are going to negate the numbers. But again, Zeke Elliott, more yards than anybody since 2016. One of the best blocking backs in NFL. And a guy who was averaging 4.8 yards a carry through the first 8 games, even with 4 of them with a torn PCL. Doesn't sound like somebody who's washed to me. But then again, what do I know? I'm a guy with a day job and a voodoo doll. And we're going to keep on bringing it to you as we start ramping up for training camp. Oh, one other little note. Interesting thing that I saw this morning on Twitter. And it really caught my attention because a guy was out swimming in Greece. And the headline was, man survives 18 hours at sea holding onto a football. I was like, wait a minute. 18 hours in the ocean holding onto a football. I had to look at it. Now, of course, this is Europe. Soccer ball is a football. Makes sense. He ended up holding on to a half-deflated soccer ball. He was swept out of sea in Greece by high currents. This soccer ball goes floating by him. He grabs a hold of it and holds onto it for 18 hours. It turns out this soccer ball was lost 10 days before, 80 miles away from some kids playing on the beach. It's a colorful soccer ball. It drifted 80 miles to him at the mesh point where he picked up the fumble and held on to it for 18 hours to save his life. I don't know about you, but a guy who can hold on to the football in the ocean for 18 hours, you might want to give him a tryout. Just saying. He ain't fumbling the football. And with that being said, you know how we roll. We're going to get out of here.
Coach here, and as always, I want to thank you all for watching, commenting, subscribing, and being part of the Joe Boo Sports Report.